Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview, where we take a look at the stories being followed in the upcoming edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined today by Thad Greenson, news editor, and Jennifer Famika Cahill, arts and features editor at the North Coast Journal. How you guys doing this week?
Doing well,
Dave. How are you?
Right on. Lots of really cool and interesting stuff you guys are covering. Why don't you tell us, Jennifer, why don't we start off by you tell us a little bit about what is the cover story this week?
This week, we are looking back at the kind of life and legacy of Sally Arnot, who, even if you do not recognize the name, if you went out of an evening for Arts Alive and you stepped into the Morris Graves in Eureka, if you saw her signature power suit, blonde, later silver bob, and pink lipstick, that was Sally Arnot. She was pretty much ubiquitous on the scene in Eureka and beyond. And her main role was not as an artist, but as a fundraiser, very much working in some ways behind the scenes, gathering money for arts events, arts, centers and things like that over the years. And also, helping artists put on shows, but also, kind of the face of fundraising for the arts in Humboldt County. It was an interesting life, and she just passed away on September 16th, I believe it was, 15th, from a stroke that she had suffered a couple of weeks earlier. She had moved to Lake Oswego to be closer to her family, her sons, but she was Humboldt born and raised. And in fact, we think of the Morris Graves Museum is the Morris Graves Museum, but before that, it was the Carnegie Library, which was the library she went to as a kid. And right next door to, of course, the Eureka Theater, where she was working at the candy counter, and where she met her husband, Philip Arnot, in, what was it, like 54, 53, when they just met in that kind of very 50s way of him asking, can I give you a ride home? And she says, you can pick me up tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And which everybody chuckles at because it's a bit forward, right? For its time. But forward was kind of the name of the game for her. She asked everybody for money in a kind of a grassroots way. She's the one that started the Brick by Brick initiative at the museum, where people could pay $65 at a time and one brick at a time. They were raising money for the museum's retrofit. And then, she also asked a lot of local donors. And some of that had to do with, her social circle. If you knew her, you probably gave to the Humboldt Arts Council, also known as the HAC, runs the Morris Graves Museum. And long ago, it was founded in the mid-60s, but in the 70s, and 70s and 80s, there was a center, an art center down over where, for a while, First Street Gallery used to be there in the E. Jansen building. For a while, that was where a lot of shows went on, a lot of brown bag lunchtime concerts and things like that. People told me that when the concert would be going and then the train would come blowing past and interrupt the music for a minute. That's how long it was. Long ago it was. The train was blown by. But eventually, because of the need to retrofit that building, and at this point, Arnot had already been working pretty tirelessly and always unpaid with the Humboldt Arts Council. And they had to leave the Jansen building because it had to be retrofitted for earthquake stuff, right? The seismic retrofit that so many buildings underwent locally. And so they were looking for a new home. And the city of Eureka said, hey, we will sell you this Carnegie Library for pretty much nothing. It was a nominal fee of, I think, $1. And then you just have to pay for the retrofitting and to renovate it into a museum, which sounds like a deal. But if you've ever renovated a building, you know it's a money pit. And it was going to cost about $1 million.
Wow.
Yes. And you can just picture the sort of Dr. Evil, $1 million, right? It's an unfathomable sum at the time in terms of, local fundraising. Undaunted, Sally Arnot dug in and went around asking everybody and their mother for money. And the thing that I found over and over again as I talked to different people she worked with, people she socialized with, people were like Libby Maynard, who's at the Ink People, and, everybody kind of said when I asked, did you ever see anybody say no to Sally Arnot? And they all laughed and said no, or not twice, or, like maybe you tried to put her off, but she pursued and she would get you eventually. When Jemima Har, who is the executive director now of the museum and curator, when she first came on board 17 years ago, she said the first thing that kind of blew her away was that she would watch Sally walk up to somebody at Rotary and just say, hey, we need a new computer for the museum, and I think you should pay for it. And then people would, which I'm like, note to self, ask more people for money. But it was a matter of both, her tenacity, her boldness, really her dedication to the arts. She wanted museums here. She wanted arts events here. She wanted shows here, exhibitions. She had spent a few years in San Francisco after her first, few years of being married. And, she fell in love with all of the music and the, exhibits and galleries and museums and whatnot. And she wanted to bring some of that to Humboldt, I think. And she also wanted to patronize artists. She bought a lot of art. People who have visited her home remarked upon the fact that there just really was not a bare spot on the wall. She bought a ton of local art. She bought art whenever she traveled, which was another thing that she loved. But she really wanted to support artists. Interestingly, some of the work of fundraising is about reaching out to, different communities and people with money. So in Humboldt County, during the time of fundraising for the museum, that meant a lot of her very conservative social circle. Her husband, Philip Arnot, had a conservative political column in the Eureka Reporter. He also did a community comment spot on KINS, which is quite conservative, which you'd think is sort of diametrically opposed to what we think of as, the Humboldt County arts scene, right? Bunch of radicals over here. But, she was able to find people in that realm who wanted to fund arts, who wanted to give money, who wanted to see a museum, who wanted to, have exhibitions and be attached to that effort. And the story of funding for the arts since forever. There is the patron side, and there is the creative side. And those are not necessarily sides that see eye to eye. And her gift, and it wasn't absolute, but her gift was being able to bridge that, according to a lot of the people that I spoke to. Sanderson Morgan worked with her for a lot of years on, putting together the collection and setting kind of guidelines for how the museum would collect. And he said that, they were poles apart, I think was the phrase he used, in terms of their worldview, but they worked well together and they got along as friends because they had a common goal. They were working on this thing. It wasn't, without criticism. There were people who felt that because of, her perspective and, the perspective of patrons, that the museum put on safer shows, less diverse shows, et cetera, at least in its early years. But, most of the people that I spoke with said that really her gift was about putting together, the needs for, arts, events, venues, et cetera, with the people who could pay for them and who had an interest in, kind of promoting arts in Humboldt County. Interestingly, when I was looking through everything, I was like, well, did she ever do any art herself? And she did actually get an art history degree from HSU. I don't know if it's still the case, but back then you had to, she graduated in like 82. You had to get, you had to take studio art classes in order to graduate with an art history degree. And she had, painted and done a lot of work. Her kids said that she had tried everything, like every medium, and that there were like 100 pieces somewhere in storage. Jemima Har was just kind of Googling to find information and gather things to make an announcement from the museum about Sally and her passing. And she saw there was an Etsy. And at first I was like, wait, are you saying she had an Etsy this whole time? But in fact, she did not. Someone was selling one of her paintings, a watercolor, on Etsy. And she bought it. So Jemima paid for this thing. It shipped. It came to her. And there it is. It's, a watercolor of some boats in the Eureka Harbor. Like, you've seen so many compositions in Humboldt. Like that's it's kind of a classic Humboldt scene. We have the forests, we have the bay, and it really was interesting to me to see her kind of creative endeavor, and that she was in her painting, kind of like everybody else, appreciating the same things, wanting to communicate some of the same things. But really what her thing was, because she hardly ever talked about her painting, I guess, to other people, at least in Humboldt, outside of her family. Her thing was promoting other artists, really promoting the arts. She found her niche and her passion. Like I said, working sometimes, 40-hour weeks, just volunteering because this was important to her. And that was really fascinating to me. She also had a very strong friendship with Morris Graves, and he ended up donating what appears to be the bulk of funding for establishing the museum in the Carnegie Building, with almost $1 million in cash and paintings. Wow. So yeah, a big hunk of that was, down to, according to Robert Yarber, who, along with his wife Desiree, runs the Morris Graves Foundation, a lot of that was down to the fact that he trusted that the Humboldt Arts Council was going to take care of his work, take care of his legacy, essentially, and that it would be, cherished somewhere. And so, that's why we have that museum. It strikes me that a lot of things happen in Humboldt because of, a handful of very strong personalities.
Definitely. And this was what a great tribute that you put together here for Sally. It weaves together the history of art and culture in our community, the Humboldt Arts Council, the Humboldt Community Cultural Center, and so there's a ton more in there besides what you described here today. So I definitely encourage people to check it out. Any last thoughts about how the community is going to celebrate and honor Sally?
Yeah, there is an event on October, is it 16th? I think it is.
Yeah.
Yes. At the Morris Graves from noon to 5, and people are encouraged to come. It's open to the public. People are encouraged to come and share stories and pictures and things like that. The memorial, with her family and her burial already happened this past weekend, but this will be more of a community, kind of an arts community celebration of life at the museum, the place where she basically put her heart and soul into.
It's quite the legacy, and our community benefited immensely. So I think we should encourage people to pay tribute, pay respects rather, and at very least go check out the museum and see what we have to show for all of that hard work over the many years. So thank you again, Jen.
Thank you.
How about you, Thad? Let's pivot over to you and talk about what you're covering this week.
Yeah, so this week I have a story about kind of updating folks on the Potter Valley project, which is something I think folks have heard a lot about in the last couple of years, kind of in the recesses, but it hasn't been really a focal point in local news coverage. But PG&E has run the Potter Valley project for decades now, and it is a series of 2 dams on the Eel River and a hydroelectric powerhouse there. And so, I think that folks are, as most people are probably well aware, that the Eel River, at least the lower ends of the Eel River, are really in dire straits. Salmon and steelhead populations have been declining for years and are in threatened and endangered status now. And this year, just actually earlier this month, for the first time, the South Fork of the Eel ran dry before it met back up with the main stem. And so just flows and water quality have been huge problems there for a number of years. And part of that is due to these 2 dams way upriver. And so kind of for the last 2 years, a bunch of really diverse group of parties, the counties of Humboldt and Mendocino, a couple of water users districts from Sonoma and Mendocino counties, the Round Valley Indian tribes, probably forgetting somebody, but this group of parties, CalTrout, that's it, the environmental nonprofit. Have been working to try to find kind of a workable solution to what's going on in the eel. And really this was spurred because PG&E in 2019 announced that after kind of a couple years of trying to figure out what to do with this hydroelectric facility, which really isn't efficient anymore. It's not an efficient mechanism for generating power. Due to kind of a variety of environmental regulations that mandate certain flows be released from those 2 dams, and just that hydroelectric generation is just not as efficient as other means anymore. And so PG&E has been looking to try to sell these dams and found just no interest and no buyers. And then so finally in 2019 announced that they were just going to surrender the licenses to these dams, which meant that they would go through a decommissioning process and then likely be taken down. And so realizing that there's kind of a lot at stake in this conversation, especially for those water interests to our south, North Coast Congressmember Jared Huffman kind of convened this group known as the Two Basin Partnership. And got all these stakeholders into one room and tried to start negotiating kind of a way forward. And they came up with this plan where basically they would create this regional entity that would, much like is happening with the Klamath River up north, basically create this regional entity, the standalone entity that would take over operation of these dams and control of the water diversions. But in order to do that and make the case to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which oversees hydroelectric facilities, they needed to do kind of almost $20 million worth of studies and assessments, and they just couldn't raise that money. PG&E wouldn't contribute any money, and they tried for a bunch of grants and stuff like that, and just couldn't come up with it. And so just earlier this month, they kind of in a last-ditch effort asked FERC, the Regulatory Commission, for a time extension to give them kind of more time to come up with these studies and these plans. And FERC just said, no, we're not, these licenses are set to expire in April, and we're going to let them expire in April. And we're just going to go through that process. And so the news initially was seen as kind of, an end to this two basin partnership and this 2 basin solution that had been floated. And I think there was a lot of kind of hand wringing about how that would work. And my story is really kind of a little bit more forward looking and talking to folks about kind of what's next. And there's really this renewed hope that maybe this is actually a more expedient way to get to the same end. And there's some belief that FERC is not just going to let PG&E, surrender the license, leave the dams, and run off into the hills. That they're going to make sure that they see through some kind of solution. And so now, really, the parties are all refocusing on trying to engage in that process, engage in the regulatory process, and are going to come up with a new pitch to FERC to say, here's a plan that's viable. And really, I think, as I alluded to earlier, the parties with the most to lose in this are really the water interests in Mendocino and Sonoma County. That, if these dams are just taken out and all the apparatus is taken out, then all of those natural flows will come down the Eel River, and that would be certainly the environmental groups, Friends of the Eel River, would love to see that as the outcome of the situation. But I think there's also a recognition that, for 90 years now, there are parties to our south that have become very reliant on this as a water source. And in these days of escalating droughts, they don't have too many other water sources. And so even with Eel River diversions, there's Russian River communities right now that are on bottled water orders and stuff like that. And so the situation is pretty dire, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out over, probably over the next year or two, as they try to find a workable solution.
Yeah, this was great. You hit on all the key points. Stakeholders to the north, stakeholders to the south. The existing apparatus is, in effect, going on a timeline, strict timeline in terms of PG&E no longer operating it. The one of the key takeaways I thought was that it's like you said, it's in the best interest of the southern counties, Sonoma and Mendocino, that makes sure that some degree of diversion still exists. So one of the things I think you mentioned is that Potter Valley Dam if they took that one out, it would unlock 100 more miles of salmon spawning, which could prevent an extinction, theoretically anyway.
The two dams it's Van Horn Dam, which is downriver, and then about 12 miles upriver they have Scott Dam. And so they built Scott Dam after the initial hydroelectric facility because they needed to store more water, basically, because the Van Horn Dam Cape Horn Dam just holds a little bit of water. And so it wasn't enough to really store enough flows that in summer months when the river's drier, that they can continue those diversions to the south. And so one of the pitches, or one of the ideas, is to remove Scott Dam, the larger dam that blocks off all that fish habitat, as you said. Leave Cape Horn Dam in place. That has fish ladders, so fish can pass through. And that would still allow the diversion apparatus. And then they would basically shift the diversions to entirely in winter months. And so that flows theoretically wouldn't be affected in the summer. And it would allow in a reservoir on the Russian River, those down south water interests to really store enough water to provide for them in the summer months.
So now I see your optimism. There's a needle that could be threaded here. There's a potential plan that stakeholders could get behind and try to figure out.
It seems like a key kind of tripping point right now is getting those down south water interests to start paying for their water that they have gotten for free for a long time now. And that would be necessary in order to fund an entity that then could operate the dam and operate the diversions and keep up the infrastructure and all that stuff.
Right on. Well, keep us posted on future developments. We really appreciate your insights on this because it's something that's not on everybody's radar.
Will do.
Oh, well, right on. Jennifer, why don't you tell us a little bit about, in the few minutes we have left, a little bit about what you're covering in the arts and features beat. Real little.
Real little. Just very quickly, two very exciting things happened to me in the last couple of weeks. One, I discovered that I love plantains with my eggs. And I discovered this over at the Grind Coffee Shop, which is now owned by Gabby Long, who runs Taste of Bim. She is the chef and owner over there. And mind you, the grind is not like full Caribbean. It's like got a little bit of, as she put it, a little splash of island in it. And there's some great items, but among them an egg sandwich with a little bit of plantain and curry aioli on an English muffin, which, since no one will make me a fried egg and cheese on a Kaiser roll that I can just grab and go at a deli, it's all I'm asking for. Humboldt looks at all of Humboldt. This is really, honestly, like my new jam. This is the egg sandwich that I want now. It's great. And anyway, it's a redone situation over there. And it's a different take on some sort of grab and go coffee shop items, which I love anyway. And then the other thing worth checking out is morisqueta, which is like a wonderful kind of pork in this case, a tomatillo sauce over rice with beans. And there are a lot of that and other Michoacan specialties at Las Michoacanas. That's the spoiler. That's where the food is from. But that part of Western Mexico has, a very different cuisine and a lot to be enjoyed and explored. We're lucky to have it.
That's in the old Rita's location in Eureka?
Yes, people still stumble in there like, is this Rita's? Can I? And it's fine. Order something. Don't be ashamed of your mistake. Just go in and eat.
Right on. I'm going to take you up on that. Thad, Jennifer, thank you so much. This was really great this week. We really appreciate you guys. North Coast Journal on newsstands now, available online. Also, pick one up. Stay informed. Stay safe. Till next week, Thad, Jennifer, and everybody out there, take care.
See you next week.